Welcome back everybody to another video, and in this video I'm going to show you exactly how I assess my property deals. It's the same steps I follow. It's the best way to assess property deals out there, and the more times you do it, the better you get at it. At this point I can look at a property with my eyes closed and just about decide whether or not I'll invest in it. That is a joke, by the way, guys, but nonetheless, let's get into the first property. Now I have this one here in One Lorna Place, Melton West, and what I usually do is I follow this property checklist criteria. This is how I assess all the property deals for clients. This is the step-by-step process you want to follow. And essentially, I break it down into red flags and negotiables, right? The red flags include flood zone, bushfire, heritage zone, public housing, airport noise, major highways, council zoning, and pools. All right. I'm going to go through them one by one. And we take this property here, for example. It's a simple brick home, a decent asset, looks pretty good on the interior. And when you look at this asset, it is a nice corner block property that was recently sold for around $700,000, probably rented at very, very low, but that's a different story. This one's a nice corner block and a nice quiet street, but let's just go through the criteria. So if you want to look at the flood zones, the bushfire zones, and the heritage zones, it's very simple. You can go to Vic Plan, and it varies by state. So Queensland, New South Wales, that have their own zoning portals, which you can go and have a look at. And then when you go, you can type in the address, and then you want to go to layers, and you can look at what we have here, which is bushfire zones, like the bushfire management overlay, as well as the bushfire prone areas. And if you zoom out, you can see which parts of that location are under bushfire zone. And gladly, this one isn't under any of those zones. Now, the next thing you want to look at is land subject to inundation, as well as the floodway overlay is the two layers that I love to check, if I can spell this one here. And once again, this doesn't fall in any of those zones. So when you zoom out, you can see where those zoning issues are essentially, right? They fall far away from the actual property itself. So you know it's good from both a fire and flood perspective. So you can tick that off. Now, in a very similar fashion, you can go in and you can check your heritage zoning. Super simple. You can check your heritage overlay. You can check the heritage. You can also check the Aboriginal heritage overlay. And you can see once again, this property doesn't fall under any heritage overlay. So that is a tick as well. Now, with public housing, you want to be contacting a local property manager who will be able to give you advice on where the public housing actually is. I like to stay about 1 to 2 streets away. I will not buy a property where there is public housing right next to it, for example. But ultimately, you want to be trying to mitigate and stay away from public housing. You want to be buying in good pockets that owner occupiers want to buy in the future. And usually if there's public housing, well, people don't want to live near those type of people, and that's just the hard facts. Airport noise, usually if there's an airport close by, that's when you'd really check it. In this case, Melton doesn't really have any close by airports, so you're usually fine on that perspective. A lot of regional towns in Queensland and etc. have a lot of airports close by, and you really want to mitigate buying right next to an airport where possible. Major highways, once again, this is a visual check. You look across, there is no major highways. But for example, if you are to ask me, would I buy a property here? Probably not, because it's very, very close to that major highway. There is going to be additional noise. There might be harder to get a tenant because they don't want to live close to that property. And that would be a deal breaker for me, for example. Let's keep going through the list. And remember, and the way I'm going through it's a very systematic process. Council zoning, you want to be targeting mostly low residential housing. And this one is in a pink zone, which is general residential zoning, which usually means it's low density housing like normal houses, townhouses, no units, which is good. Now, there are some people out there who will buy in medium residential or high density zoning. They'll buy a house there in the hope that they will be able to change that into a low density apartment or a big unit complex, or a developer will come and buy it off them. It can work, but only for specific strategies. It's not something I rely on, but something to be aware of. I mean, these last two people might disagree with me. This is just my perspective when I try to invest in properties and how I approach it. For me, pools is an absolute red flag. I hate pools with a passion. I think they are the most useless thing when it comes from an investment perspective to a house. Yes, it increases the rental appraisal of a property by $20 to $50 per week, but ultimately it's not worth it in terms of the maintenance. You have to do yearly maintenance. Things go wrong. You need to make sure it meets safety standards, etc. It is not worth the hassle. Avoid pools, in my opinion, like the plague. It's just not worth it. And that is the main red flags with properties that you should be checking for. Now, there's a lot more factors to be actually checking as well, but before I do get into that, and I do have a property property course, guys. It goes through from the complete basics of property investing, from how to get a mortgage, all the way to advanced property fundamentals and more about sales negotiations, how to deal with agents, going through different properties, suburb analysis, and more. So if you're feeling lost, confused, or stuck in 2026 and you're not sure about what the best move is to make, jump into the property course. You also get a month access to the private community and you can gain so much knowledge. It is an absolute steal when you really think about how much value you will get for the amount or the little amount you will actually pay for. There's over 8 in-depth modules, 60 plus videos, and hours of content for you guys to go through. And you know exactly what you get because I break down each topic in the education curriculum. So you know exactly what you need to study and you need to learn. And I go through it all, guys. It's an absolute steal. There's over 200 members who have purchased the course who are actively using it. It is an absolute bargain, right? Make sure you jump in and grab the course. You get access to the private community. So you win-win in every single way. All right, let's keep going with the video. Now, the next thing is landscape. Now, landscape is obviously, once again, a visual inspection. Now, this property is more of a trapezium style asset, which is fine. Look, ultimately, the landscape is never really a big detractor. You want to be having a property where it's mainly a rectangular shape. And the reason for that, it's more preferred in general from a land usability perspective. They usually have a bigger yard, but then also when it comes down to development potential, a big rectangular piece of land is a lot more beneficial than a trapezium piece of land. Like normally, a lot of these corner blocks, they would be really good if it had a bit more space because you can easily subdivide or develop on that land. If you take this one, for example, right here, which is just very close, this is a corner block as well, but now you see you have all of this empty space at the back, which you can put a driveway through, and now you have dual access to the property, and you can build a granny flat or another property on there, while this one doesn't have that much space. Now, once again, this is a negotiable. It's a trapezium. It's fine. It's something you would consider, or a trapezium-like shape. Now, land size greater than 400 square meters. The reason I have this is more of an arbitrage setting in the sense that a lot of cookie cutter homes these days are built on 250 to 350 square meters pieces of land. I don't really prefer. I like to buy established homes in established pockets with big pieces of land, like this property nearby. That is ideal for me. It's got potential development potential. You can demolish and develop it. It's got more options than a very small piece of land. Now, that's not to say that 250 square meters in the heart of Melbourne CBD isn't going to grow in value, say right here, but there is more optionality. And when you're looking at a certain price point and you can find a good property, having more land in that suburb isn't necessarily a detractor. So I like to have greater than 400 square meters. Now, the year built is you want it roughly between 30 to 35 years. Once again, this is not a deal breaker. I have seen properties actually much older in perfect condition, and I've seen newer properties built 2010 plus, which are riddled with issues. And this one was probably built pre-1990, pre-1980. I would say around 1980 because it's a brick house. It's in decent condition. It's clearly been renovated on the interior in some parts, and something like this is a good asset to hold for the next 10-20 years, in my opinion, as long as it passes a building and pest inspection. Now, you can get properties like this, weatherboard properties built in the 1950s to 1970s. These are also good assets. They come with their own sets of trade-offs as well, which I go deeper in the course. And one thing to note is that if you're getting like a 1950s property, it's probably best to do an electrical as well as a plumbing inspection just to help make sure the internals are okay. Ultimately, you can only take the inspector's advice to the quality and the standard of the asset. A lot of the times when you're buying pre-1970, they're going to come with stumps. They're going to come in weatherboard style. They're going to have a lot more trade-offs. And so you really need to be careful. So my sweet spot is buying 1970 to 1980 to 1990 properties because you find good properties. You find them brick houses. They're on concrete slabs and they're usually built to a very high standard from what I and my experience shows. And once again, guys, this is just all my opinion and how I approach it. Everyone has their own trade-offs, right? And by the way, I did say that if you're older, you may get depreciation benefits. Even when you have a 30-year-old home, you're not going to get that many depreciation benefits unless it's been significantly renovated on the interior. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, proximity to the nearest public transport is relatively important. It adds to the livability of that property. Having a property close to a train station or a bus stop is useful, but once again, not a deal breaker. So that's something I'm just going to gloss over. Now, any easements, caveats, or title issues. Now, you can talk to a conveyancer. They'll be able to get all the documents for you. Sometimes a sales agent will already have them ready for you. So you can once again just quickly go through the easements, the caveats, and title issues. You really need to be careful about easements and caveats if you are looking to subdivide or develop the property, because some properties, especially these older homes, they will have caveats on them, which will limit the subdivision or development potential of that property. So be careful. Any big poles or power lines, right? The main thing when it comes to investing in property, I don't like to buy properties near high transmission lines. When I've gone and tried to value some of these properties I was looking to buy, the valuations came lower in certain banks because of the proximity to transmission lines. It also reduces owner-occupier appeal, so it is something you should be careful of. It is something I do avoid. Now, if it's just a small street pole out the front, that to me is just a trade-off. It's not something to ruin a property deal over. If it's a street lamp, it's not a bad deal, right? You just want to do a visual check. Like that street lamp is fine. You're not going to do anything about that. And like generally speaking, even like this pole at the front or this street lamp, once again, it's not a big issue to me. It's usually the high transmission lines, the big power boxes, those sort of things I try to avoid. T-junction and roundabout. Now, I don't like buying properties in T-junctions. I'm not talking about this T-junction to a quiet note through road. I'm talking more like this T-junction over here, for example, where it is a main road, and this is not necessarily a busy main road, but it's another main road. It's another sort of a longer stretch main road which directly leads into this house. I don't like that. There is a risk of, cars just not stopping and crashing into those houses. We've seen it on the news. The risk is low, but it can happen. It's something to be more aware of. I avoid them. I also avoid properties on roundabouts because when you look at this, you can see just how busy this intersection would be. It's not necessarily about the roundabout per se, but it's more about the fact that intersections or big roundabouts just naturally have more traffic, foot traffic, car traffic, noise levels, which makes your property less desirable. And so it is something I avoid. Lane of roads. Let's go through this, right? Once again, comes down to major highways, right? I don't really like to buy properties on this sort of type of road where it's busy main road. It's got multiple lanes. That's not really a multiple lane road, but like it's a busy sort of main road. And properties like this, like I wouldn't buy a house on this road because there's just 2 lanes on each side. It's a busier road. It's going to bring more traffic. It's going to be less desirable for owner occupiers and tenants, something I avoid. North facing. Now, north facing properties have an increased appeal to owner occupiers, not a deal breaker. It's something I easily trade off within a second if it's not there, but it's something to be aware of. Now, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, I like to go minimum 3x1. I don't really like to get 2x1 properties unless there's potential to add a third bedroom. In some cases, it's more about the land aspect and the potential for development where I would consider it. But yeah, does it have a shed and is it powered, right? Having a shed to a property, especially in regional areas, I have noticed increases the rental income by around $20 to $30 in my experience. If it's a powered shed, it makes it even better and more attractive to tenants. It'll get your property tenant out quicker. Home build type, brick, timber, and more. This comes back to the weatherboard style properties. I prefer brick assets on concrete slabs. Some people will accept weatherboard properties on stumps. They have their own trade-offs, but generally speaking, I prefer brick. I accept a weatherboard. I don't go for fiber houses. Do not go for fiber houses. They have asbestos. It's not worth the trouble, in my opinion. Air conditioners and fans. Look, while air conditioners are good, having more units increases the maintenance cost, but also increases renter appeal. So once again, it's a trade-off. Having one air conditioner in the main living room is probably the most important out of everything, or having a ducted system is even better, but it's good to have. If you're in Victoria, you really need to make sure that you have heating and cooling in the main living room. I'm pretty sure from memory there is a law around that for minimal rental standards, so double check that. Now, large trees. Now, this is a big one, and I don't think it's talked about enough. For example, now this property doesn't have any large trees in it, but if I was to have a look at this, I'm going to just quickly show you this for example, guys, right? But say this large tree here was at the back of your property or very close to your property block. That can be an issue. It could lead to structural foundational issues. It could lead to your gutters being filled up and needs to be more regularly maintained and clean. And you do need to be worried about, the type of trees, because some of the trees can't be removed because it's protected by local council laws, for example. So you really need to be aware of what trees are in your backyard. If there's any large tree, you should really be talking to the agent and finding out what that tree is and if there's any limitations on chopping that tree down in the future. But even if you go down that route, it can be expensive. So please be aware. Now, these last 3 are important, but once again, trade-offs. Proximity to primary school, high school, private schools, and park and recreation is important, but I never found these to be deal breakers. They are simple trade-offs you can make within a second. And remember, if a house is $50,000 more because it's just closer to a school compared to the other house, the properties will still grow relative to the suburb growth, right? That's what's important to remember here. Now, yes, the property near the high school might go for extra $10,000 more in an auction, but generally speaking, from a capital growth perspective, you're going to be fine either way. So once again, it's a negotiable. And I hope this has given you a good, quick rundown of how I assess properties. So if I take this property here, for example, in California Gully, just quickly going through it off the top of my head so you can see my thought process. This is a nice brick asset. It's got good structural bones. It looks to be on concrete slab, which is also good. The interior is clearly worn out. The carpets need replacing. The kitchen is dated, but it looks relatively rentable if the carpets are updated. And the paint colors don't match, so getting them to match is good. Nice big land space, great potential for development work. It's got side access, so plenty of space if you remove that shed even to do some more work. You can see here that one of the bedrooms is small. I like to go minimum 3x3. That's generally my standard. And then when you look at the property on Street View, if we just open this up very quickly, it's important to do all this. You can see it's on a nice quiet street, but it is relatively close to commercial zoning areas. There are some takeaway shops and a pub, and it's also very close to this sports area. So on Saturdays and weekends, this area is going to get busier. You might have some increased noise here. When you look at this asset, you can tell straight away that it's got good bones, that it really isn't in perfect rental condition at the moment. It needs some cosmetic upgrades. It has great potential to do a cosmetic upgrade, manufacture some equity, and then down the line, you can look at potentially subdividing the block, developing the block. So plenty of options. And so the person who bought this for $590 for 1,000 square meter block of land, I think in my opinion, has got a great deal. He has a lot of potential to smashing out this property into lots of money. So if this video has helped you, smash the like button, guys, jump into the private community, and also jump into the course as well to educate yourself so that you can buy the right type of assets in 2026. Till next time, thank you very much.